I came home from a work trip 2 days early and found my 9-year-old daughter home alone, scrubbing the kitchen floor as punishment. My in-laws had taken their real granddaughter to an amusement park. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just did what I had to do. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My name is Monica Reed. I'm 35 years old. I manage disasters for a living, tidy, predictable ones on paper. For an insurance company, I take the chaos of a fire or a flood and turn it into neat columns and summary reports. I create order out of wreckage. My own life was meant to be the opposite. It was supposed to be the one place where I didn't have to assess the damage. Driving home from O'Hare Airport, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't quite place. My work trip to Denver had wrapped up 2 days ahead of schedule, a rare gift. All I could think about was surprising Mila, my 9-year-old daughter. I pictured her face when I walked through the door, the way her eyes would light up before she'd launch herself into my arms. That image was my North Star, the thing that guided me through lonely hotel rooms and long flights. The thought of her smile was the only thing that made living in that crowded, tense house bearable. The Saturday afternoon traffic was light. As I drove down the interstate, I passed the massive, colorful sign for the big amusement park, its roller coasters like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. A pang of guilt hit me. I made a mental note that we should take Mila and Harper, my 11-year-old stepdaughter, there soon. A real family day. The 4 of us together, pretending we were the happy, blended family I'd once dreamed we could be. When I turned onto our quiet suburban street, the house was still, too still. I pulled into the driveway and a prickle of unease ran up my spine. The car belonging to Derek, my husband, was gone. So was the big sedan that belonged to his parents, Marla and Jean. Only my sensible sedan sat in the drive, collecting a thin layer of dust. A small, ugly part of me felt a wave of relief. It meant I'd have a few precious hours alone with Mila before the noise and the judgment returned. Just us. The front door was unlocked, which was the first sign something was wrong. Jean, my father-in-law, was a fanatic about locking doors. I stepped inside, my carry-on bag still slung over my shoulder, and the smell hit me like a physical blow. It was the sharp, industrial-strength scent of bleach. It wasn't the clean, fresh smell of a Saturday morning tidy-up. It was the acrid, chemical smell of punishment, a smell that scoured the air and burned the back of my throat. "Mila," I called out, my voice sounding small in the sudden, oppressive silence of the house. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl on the entryway table. They clattered, the sound unnaturally loud. "Derek, Marla," no answer. The silence that came back was heavy-weighted. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I walked down the hall, my sensible work heels sinking into the plush runner Marla, my mother-in-law, insisted on. I moved toward the kitchen, drawn by a terrible magnetic pull, and then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic scraping sound. Scrape, wipe, scrape, wipe. It was a sound of relentless, miserable labor. I peered around the corner, my hand still gripping the strap of my bag. I saw her before she saw me. My daughter, my sweet, gentle Mila, was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the vast, unforgiving expanse of the white kitchen tile. Her small back was hunched in concentration, her dark ponytail askew. Her face, when she turned slightly, was smudged with dirt and streaked with tears that she hadn't bothered to wipe away. A large, sloshing bucket of gray, chemical-smelling water sat beside her, a testament to how long she'd been at this. A worn, wet rag was balled tightly in her small hand. The floor around her gleamed with a sterile, painful brightness, but she just kept scrubbing the same small spot over and over as if she could scrub herself into invisibility. Her movements were robotic, exhausted. The sight of it hollowed me out, leaving nothing but a cold, ringing void. She must have sensed me because her small shoulders tensed. She looked up, her eyes, usually so full of light, were wide and dull. They didn't fill with the joy I'd been picturing for the entire 2-hour flight. They filled with pure, undiluted fear. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you're not supposed to be home." Her first words to me weren't a welcome. They were a statement of fact, an admission that my presence was a complication to her punishment. "Where is everyone, sweetie?" I asked. I was amazed by my own voice. It was impossibly calm level, as if I were commenting on the weather. Inside, a hurricane was tearing me apart. "They took Harper to the amusement park," she whispered, her gaze dropping back to the floor. She couldn't look at me. "Grandma said I had to get the grout clean because I left a juice box on the counter." A juice box. A single, sticky juice box. My mind went completely blank, filled with a white-hot rage that was so intense it felt like silence. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I walked over, knelt down on the cold tile, and gently took the disgusting gray rag from her small, chapped hand. I helped her to her feet. Her knees were bright red, rubbed raw against the hard floor, marks of her penance. "Go to your room," I said, my voice soft but lined with steel. "Pack your favorite books and the stuffed animals you can't sleep without. We're going on a little trip, just us." She stared at me, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, the question laced with the certainty that trouble was her natural state in this house. "No, baby," I told her, my voice unwavering. I smoothed a stray piece of hair from her forehead. "The trouble is over." While she went to her room, her small feet shuffling on the stairs, I walked into the small office they'd given me. I moved with a strange, detached efficiency, as if I were managing someone else's crisis. I gathered my laptop, the folder of our essential financial documents, Mila's birth certificate, and our passports. Everything I needed to erase us from this house. Everything I needed to build a wall so high they could never touch her again. I drove us to a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with a flickering neon sign that advertised weekly rates and color television. The place looked worn out and forgotten, a perfect hiding spot. Mila was silent in the passenger seat, clutching Peanut, her worn-out stuffed elephant with one button eye. His familiar, floppy shape seemed to be the only thing anchoring her. She stared out the window, watching the world go by as if she were a ghost. The room smelled of stale air freshener and old cigarette smoke, but it was clean enough. More importantly, it was ours. It was safe. I double-bolted the door and slid the chain lock into place. The sound of the metal clicking home was the most satisfying thing I'd ever heard. I didn't try to explain everything to her. The words were too big, too ugly. Instead, I did the one thing I knew would feel like a rescue. I ordered a large pizza with extra cheese and 2 small cartons of vanilla ice cream from the place down the street. We sat cross-legged on one of the lumpy double beds, the stiff, patterned comforter a poor excuse for a picnic blanket. We watched cartoons on the loud, buzzing television, the colors garishly bright. Mila ate 3 whole slices of pizza, her eyes never leaving the screen. It was the first time in months I'd seen her eat without someone watching her, judging her portion size, reminding her not to chew with her mouth open. Here she was just a kid eating pizza on a bed. It was a small, perfect rebellion. "Can we stay here?" she asked later, her voice small and muffled by a spoonful of ice cream. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I'd come home. "For a little while," I promised her, my heart aching. I watched as her eyelids grew heavy and she finally drifted off to sleep, her face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a year. Peanut was tucked under her arm, his one eye standing guard. She was safe. That was step 1. Now it was time for step 2. After Mila was sound asleep, the television muted, I opened my laptop. The motel's free Wi-Fi was painfully slow, but it worked. I typed in my bank's web address, my fingers moving with a cold precision. I logged into my account, the familiar blue and white screen a portal to my new life. The automatic payment for the mortgage was right there on the summary page, $2,180. It was scheduled to be withdrawn on the 1st of the month. That was in 3 days. My contribution to the house where my daughter was treated like a servant. My finger hovered over the cancel payment button. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt. I had been paying for the roof over their heads, the roof under which they systematically, quietly broke my daughter's spirit. Not anymore. I clicked the button. A confirmation screen popped up asking if I was sure. Are you sure you want to stop paying for your own misery? Yes, I clicked again. It was done. A small digital confirmation flashed on the screen. Your payment has been canceled. Next, I opened a new browser tab. I searched for family law attorney near me. I scanned the results looking for names that sounded competent and tough. I wrote down 3 of them on a piece of motel stationery. Then, my fingers typed in the non-emergency number for the local police department and the state's Child Protective Services hotline. I minimized the browser and opened a blank document. I wrote down exactly what I was going to say to each of them. I stuck to the facts using the dispassionate language of my job. Incident: daughter found alone. Observation: forced to clean with harsh chemicals as punishment. Timeline: parents and husband absent at an amusement park with stepdaughter. I removed the emotion, the rage, the heartbreak. I made it clean. I made it a report. My phone rang just after 10 p.m., its vibration buzzing aggressively against the cheap nightstand. The screen lit up with Derek's name. I stared at it, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately, and then again. On the 5th frantic attempt, I answered and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the bed between me and my sleeping daughter. A shield. Monica, where are you? We came home and you're gone. Mila's things are gone. His voice was a mixture of panic and anger. There was no concern, not really, just the fury of being inconvenienced. Mila is with me. We're safe, I said. My voice was so flat it didn't even sound like my own. What the hell is going on? My mom is freaking out. You can't just take her. This is insane. I came home this afternoon to find our daughter on her hands and knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor with bleach while you, your parents, and Harper were at an amusement park. I said, each word a carefully placed stone. Yes, Derek, I can. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear his mother, Marla, shrieking in the background. Then the excuses began, tumbling out of him in a desperate, pathetic rush. It was all a misunderstanding. Marla was just teaching her responsibility. She overreacted about the juice box. It wasn't a big deal. He didn't know I'd be home early. You weren't there, Derek, I said, cutting him off. You chose not to be. You left her there to be their maid. We'll talk about this in the morning. This is ridiculous. Just come home, Monica. He was trying to sound reasonable, like the calm husband dealing with a hysterical wife. No, I said, and for the first time since he'd known me, he heard the absolute finality in my voice. There was no room for argument. The door was closed, locked, and barricaded. I've canceled the mortgage payment. I'll be calling a lawyer in the morning, and I've already drafted my report to Child Services. The line went dead. He had hung up. The first shot had been fired, and it had landed exactly where I'd aimed it. The next morning, I made the calls. The stale motel air felt charged with a strange new energy. I started with the police, dialing the non-emergency number I'd written down. The officer on the phone was professional but sounded distant, tired. I gave him the details from my prepared script: the time I arrived home, Mila's physical and emotional state, the family's absence. He asked a few clarifying questions and gave me a report number. It felt flimsy, just a string of digits, but it was a start. It was an official mark in a permanent record. My story was no longer just mine. It belonged to the system now. Next, I called Child Protective Services. This was harder. Speaking to the police officer felt like filing a claim, but this felt like bearing a wound. I had to describe Mila's red, raw knees, the fear in her eyes when she saw me, the way she whispered, "You're not supposed to be home." The woman on the other end of the line, who introduced herself as Tara Wallace, a caseworker from Child Protective Services, was patient and calm. Her voice was steady, which steadied me. She asked if there had been other incidents. I hesitated, shame washing over me. I recounted the small things, the 1,000 little cuts I had ignored or explained away. Mila being called a guest in the house I paid for. The way treats and desserts were always reserved for Harper. The sudden, unexplained move from her sunny bedroom into the smaller, colder room at the back of the house. Each memory was a small, sharp piece of glass in my throat. I had seen the signs. I had seen my daughter shrinking and I had told myself it was just an adjustment period. Tara told me they would have to open an investigation. This meant they would visit the Lawson home. They would need to interview Derek, Marla, and Jean. They would also need to speak with me and, gently, with Mila. The reality of it settled in my stomach like a cold stone. I had invited the government into the most painful corners of our lives. There was no going back now. My third call was to the first lawyer on my list, a woman named Erin Clark. Her website said she specialized in high-conflict family cases. I left a message on her voicemail, my voice steadier than I felt. I had a police report number. I had a CPS case number. I didn't just have a story. I had ammunition. It didn't take long for them to strike back. Marla wasn't the type to wait and see what would happen. She was a fighter and she fought dirty. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Tara Wallace from Child Protective Services. Her tone had changed from our first conversation. It wasn't warm anymore. It was cautious, professional. "Monica, I need to let you know we received a call from your mother-in-law, Marla Lawson." My blood ran cold. I sat down on the edge of the motel bed. "What did she say?" "She's made some allegations," Tara said carefully, and I could hear the sound of typing in the background. "She's claiming that you're emotionally unstable. That you have a history of making dramatic outbursts and a tendency to take things out of context." The words hit me like a slap. Marla was painting me as the crazy, vindictive wife, the classic trope. She was twisting my righteous anger, the righteous anger of a mother protecting her child, and turning it into a weapon to be used against me. She was trying to discredit me before I could even tell my full story. "She also claims," Tara continued, her voice flat, "that you coached Mila, that you staged the scene in the kitchen to build a case against the family. She is alleging that you are an unfit mother who is causing Mila undue stress by ripping her away from her stable family home." The audacity of it was breathtaking. The system I had turned to for protection was now being used to investigate me. The vulnerability was terrifying. For a horrible, fleeting moment, I felt the ground give way beneath me. Marla's strategy was brutally simple. If you can't defend the crime, attack the person who reported it. She was trying to poison the well to make anything I said seem like the ravings of a madwoman. The initial wave of panic gave way to a surge of cold, clarifying fury. Marla wanted a fight. I would give her a war, but my war wouldn't be fought with lies and hysteria. It would be fought with paperwork. I called my lawyer, Erin Clark, back immediately. She had listened to my voicemail and agreed to take my case. I told her everything Marla had said to the caseworker. Erin's voice was calm and reassuringly professional. "They always do this," she said, her tone unimpressed. "It's the first play in their book. It won't work. Now we build our own file, a better one." That night, after Mila was asleep, I started a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Project Lighthouse. I was going to shine a light so bright it would burn away all of their shadows and lies. First, I took clear, time-stamped photos of Mila's knees. The redness had faded, but a faint map of ugly, purple bruises remained, documented. Next, I called our old neighbor, a kind woman named Tracy Miller who had always been friendly to Mila. I asked her if she happened to remember seeing the Lawsons leave on Saturday. She did. "Oh yeah," she said. "It was just Derek and his folks with the older girl, Harper." I remember thinking it was odd. "I figured you and the little one were out of town or something." I took a deep breath. "Tracy, would you be willing to write that down in a statement for me?" She agreed without hesitation, one more brick in my wall. Then, I composed an email to Mila's teacher, Miss Julia Turner. I explained that we had moved unexpectedly and that Mila would be absent for a few days while we got settled. Then I asked the important question. I asked if she would be willing to write a short letter detailing the concerns she had previously shared with me about Mila's sudden withdrawal in class, her exhaustion, and her lack of interest in activities she used to love. Another brick. Finally, I booked an initial appointment with a child counselor, a woman named Dana Brooks, whose profile said she specialized in family trauma. I needed a professional to document Mila's state of mind, to give her a safe space to talk, and to provide an expert opinion on her well-being. Marla thought her words could beat me, but I was building a fortress of facts, one documented, verifiable truth at a time. Her story was a house of cards. Mine was being built of stone. Aaron, my lawyer, told me to start gathering any and all communication I had. Texts, emails, voicemails, anything at all. She said that in the mess of everyday conversation, people often reveal their true selves. I spent a long, painful night scrolling through months of text messages on my phone, the blue and gray bubbles a timeline of my own denial. It was like reading a stranger's diary. There were dozens of texts from Derek, my husband, each one a small, dismissive excuse for his parents' behavior. Mom's just old-fashioned, you can't take it personally. Dad's from a different generation, he doesn't mean anything by it. Harper's having a tough time adjusting, let's just give it time. Reading them now, I saw them for what they were. A pattern of gaslighting, a deliberate effort to make me feel like I was the one who was overreacting. Then I found it. It was in a group text from 2 months ago, a conversation between Marla, Derek, and Jean, my father-in-law. She must have added me to the group by mistake and never realized it. The text was about Harper's upcoming school pageant. Harper had been cast as the lead and Marla was ecstatic. Her text read, "We have to make sure our real granddaughter has the best costume. She deserves to shine. Let's spare no expense. Our real granddaughter." The 3 words stared back at me from the screen, glowing with a hideous, clarifying light. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, it wasn't a mistake, it was a mission statement. In their eyes, Mila was not family. She was an obligation, an outsider, an obstacle to their perfect family picture. A guest who had long overstayed her non-existent welcome. This was the proof. This wasn't about old-fashioned values or tough love. This was a deliberate 2-tiered system of affection they had built in their home, and my daughter had been assigned to the bottom rung. I took a screenshot, my hand trembling slightly. I saved it. I immediately emailed it to Aaron with the subject line, "Exhibit A armed with Marla's damning text message and Tracy's witness statement." Aaron advised our next tactical move. "We need to keep Derek away from Mila," she said, her voice firm. "For now, we can't have him showing up and trying to confuse or intimidate her." She filed for a temporary protective order. It wasn't an order claiming Derek would physically harm Mila, but one designed to prevent him from causing further emotional distress. It would legally prevent him from approaching her at her new school, from calling her phone, from trying to see her without my explicit consent and supervision. It was a legal bubble of safety around my daughter. Derek was served the papers by a process server at his parents' house. His reaction, I heard later, was explosive. He left me a string of furious, rambling voicemails. I didn't listen to all of them, just the first few seconds of each. I was cruel, I was unstable, I was alienating him from his daughter. He spat the word, but it sounded hollow and false now that I knew the truth. He didn't get it. He truly didn't. He thought this was a negotiation, a dramatic marital spat that would end with a tearful reconciliation. He didn't realize that the man I had married, the man I had once loved, had disappeared for me. In his place was just another one of them, a man who would not only stand by and watch his child be diminished but would actively orchestrate it for the comfort of others. This court order wasn't just a legal document. It was a declaration of war. There was no us to go back to. I was burning the bridge, salting the earth, and erasing the map that led back to that miserable life. I was no longer just protecting my daughter. I was systematically dismantling the family that had tried to break her. About a week later, I received an automatically forwarded email from our joint banking account. It was addressed to both me and Derek. The subject line was stark and impersonal: "Your mortgage payment is past due." The automated notice from the bank's collections department was the first tangible sign that my quiet financial counterattack was working. A grim satisfaction settled over me. I imagined the scene in that house when the notice arrived in the mail. The confusion, then the dawning, panicked realization that my money had actually stopped. The well had run dry. Marla and Jean had built their fragile comfort on my steady paycheck. They had weaponized their home against my child, all while I was the one paying for the very roof over their heads and the floor she was forced to scrub. The late notice was the first crack in their foundation. A ticking clock had just started and they could all hear it. They had 30 days until the late payment was reported to the credit bureaus, staining their financial records. They had 90 days, maybe a little more, until the bank officially began the process of taking the house away from them. They thought my power lay in my silence, in my willingness to absorb their cruelty to keep the peace. They were about to learn that my real power was in my name on the direct deposit form. It was in my ability to pay the bills, and now in my willingness to stop, let them figure out how to pay for their own roof. I was busy finding a new one for us, one where Mila would never be a guest. We moved into a small 2-bedroom rental apartment in a neighboring town. It was modest, but it was ours. While unpacking a dusty box of old electronics from the back of the closet, I found it, an old tablet we hadn't used in at least 2 years. Mila had used it for learning games when she was younger, but it had been logged into Derek's personal messaging account. He must have set it up for her and then completely forgotten to log out. My first instinct was to put it in the donation pile, a relic of a life that was over, but some strange, quiet instinct made me pause. It was the same feeling I'd had driving home from the airport, a cold certainty that I was about to find something I didn't want to see. I plugged it in. The charging symbol appeared on the dusty screen. As it slowly came back to life, I felt a familiar dread settle in my chest. I sat on a cardboard box in the middle of our new, empty living room, the tablet warming in my hands. The screen flickered to life, displaying a photo of a happier time, me, Derek, and a much younger Mila at a pumpkin patch. It felt like digging up a grave. After a few minutes, the old applications updated, and there they were. Years of archived messages. I scrolled past old, happy conversations from when we were first dating, the words now feeling like a bitter fiction. My finger trembled as I navigated to his message thread with his mother, Marla. I opened it. The truth was right there, waiting for me in cold, blue and gray bubbles of text. The messages went back to the very first month we had moved in with them. I scrolled up, my heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm against my ribs. A message from Derek to Marla. Harper is feeling insecure about Monica and Mila being here. She cried last night, said she feels like she's second best in her own home. Marla's reply was instantaneous and chilling. She is the only one that matters. We will handle it. Don't you worry. And then, a few days later, the message that stopped my heart. The one that vaporized any lingering shred of hope that this had all been a misunderstanding. From Derek, you need to be hard on Mila. Not mean, just firm. Make it clear she's a guest. Make sure Harper sees she's still the priority. It's the only way this will work without more tears from Harper. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't a case of old-fashioned parenting gone wrong. It was a deliberate, calculated strategy, a conspiracy, and it was conceived and directed by my husband. He hadn't just allowed the cruelty, he had sanctioned it. He had requested it. He had actively sacrificed my daughter's emotional well-being for his other daughter's comfort. He didn't just stand by and let it happen. He gave the order. I read the words again and again, letting them burn into my brain until they were a part of me. The betrayal was absolute, a poison that spread through every memory I had of him. This wasn't a simple failure of his character, this was his character. All his excuses, his claims of ignorance, his attempts to paint his mother as the villain, they were all lies. He had been a willing, active participant from the very beginning. I sat there in the gathering dark of my new, empty apartment, the sickly glow of the tablet lighting up my face. The grief was immense, a physical weight that pressed down on my chest. It was the death of my marriage, the death of the man I thought I knew, the death of the future I had believed in. But simmering beneath the grief was something else. Something hard and clean and sharp as a diamond, rage. My mission had been simple: get Mila out, protect her, secure our independence. Now, that wasn't nearly enough. Protecting her also meant making sure they could never do this to another child, another family. It meant ensuring Derek faced real, lasting consequences for his choices. It meant justice. I took screenshots of every single message, my fingers moving with a new, grim purpose. I uploaded the images to a secure cloud drive. Then I attached them to a new email and sent them to Aaron. The subject line was simple, the motivation. My new mission was no longer just to win primary custody and walk away. It was to expose them, all of them. I would use Derek's own words to dismantle his life just as he had tried to dismantle my daughter's gentle spirit. The fight was no longer just for Mila's future. It was for her past, for the justice she was owed for every silent tear and every moment she was made to feel worthless. Marla and Jean couldn't fight me on the facts, not with the evidence I was collecting, so they started a war of fiction. The whispers began in the quiet suburban community we'd briefly been a part of. They were poison, meant to isolate and discredit me before I ever set foot in a courtroom. I heard about it first from Tracy, the neighbor. She called, her voice hesitant and apologetic. She told me that Marla had been going door to door, a plate of cookies in one hand and a sob story in the other. She'd been telling people that I'd suffered a complete mental breakdown. That I'd kidnapped Mila in a sudden fit of paranoia and was refusing to let anyone see her. Soon after, I got a call from a mother from Mila's old school, a woman I barely knew. Her voice was dripping with a false, syrupy concern. She just wanted to check in, she said, and to see if I was getting the help I needed. The implication was clear. They were successfully painting a portrait of me as an unhinged woman, a danger to my own child. It was a classic, disgusting tactic, and to my horror, it seemed to be working. At the grocery store, people I recognized from the neighborhood would see me and quickly look away, or worse, offer a look of pity and suspicion. The story they spun was so effective because it was so simple. The protective order against Derek was twisted into proof of my vindictiveness. My refusal to speak with them was evidence of my instability. I felt a suffocating sense of exposure, as if my private pain had been turned into public gossip for their entertainment and strategic advantage. It was a calculated campaign to strip away any potential support system, to leave me utterly and completely alone, the crazy ex-wife no one would believe. I went to pick Mila up from her new school like I did every afternoon now, early enough to get there before the buses emptied the parking lot. The sun had that watery fall light, and for a second everything looked ordinary, the neat rows of parents waiting, the smell of wet leaves, kids hauling backpacks. Then I saw Derek's car across the street. My stomach dropped into my shoes. He was parked illegally, engine running like a threat in a metal shell. I pulled into a spot and stayed in the car for a long beat watching him. He didn't get out, he just sat there and stared, a human warning sign. Then Marla stepped out of the passenger door and walked toward the school entrance like she owned the sidewalk. Her posture was theatrical, arms swinging, a little smile carved onto her face. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, and I went to meet her on the sidewalk. "You can't be here," I said, keeping my voice even. I didn't want an audience to see me lose my head. "I'm here to see my granddaughter," she said loud enough that a few parents glanced over. "The one you've stolen from us." She said it like it was a fact everyone should nod to. Some of them did nod without even knowing anything more than the volume of her voice. She wanted a scene, and she wanted witnesses. Her plan was working the moment her words left her mouth. I pulled my phone out and opened the photo of the temporary protective order Aaron had sent me that morning. Aaron had told me to have a screenshot handy in case Marla tried this. My hands weren't shaking. I held the screen steady and showed it. "Ma'am, you're not allowed on school property," I said plainly, the legal words tastefully missing. "Please step back." She scoffed and started to move toward the door. I put my hand gently but firmly on her elbow. "You can't go in," I repeated. "You have to leave now." A man in a blue polo, one of the school staff, came out after he heard the raised voices. He asked what was going on, and I explained. He asked for identification, and Marla waved him away like he was an annoyance. The principal appeared a minute later, his brow drawn. I showed him the order again. He read it, then looked at Marla. "Ma'am, you need to step off school property," he said with the quiet authority of someone who didn't want the drama in front of the kids. "If you don't, I'll have to call the police." Marla planted her hands on her hips and spat out a few more words aimed at me for the benefit of the other parents. She called me cruel and reckless. She called me the kind of names grandmothers don't say in front of children. I kept my voice low and steady. I didn't rise to her bait. I stayed calm because I knew every person in earshot remembered the way a mother with a kid had once been suddenly made out to be the villain in other people's stories. I didn't want to lose the moral high ground over spectacle. Eventually, Marla stepped away, but not before giving me one look that was pure hatred. She wanted to humiliate me in front of parents and teachers, and while she didn't fully succeed, the attempt left a scrape. That night, I had to explain to Mila why her grandmother had been shouting at the school. I saw the fear return to her face, thin and quick like bad weather. She asked if Grandma would ever come back, and I kissed the top of her head and said, "No, love. She won't be coming back." When the legal bills started coming in, I felt like the ground shifted under my feet again. Aaron's fees were fair, but they added up. Each invoice felt like a tally mark of the war. We were paying to protect the one small thing that mattered most to me, and the cost was high. There were counseling sessions for Mila, security at the school for a while, new locks on our apartment door after someone keyed our car. Every defensive move had a price. Then a thick, certified envelope arrived, addressed in a lawyerly hand. Derek's new lawyer had sent it. They were asking me to restart the mortgage payments and to begin paying what they called spousal support. They argued that since we were still legally married, I was required to keep up the house and to help him financially. It felt absurd in the simplest, most personal way. They were demanding that I keep paying for the roof under which my daughter had been punished. They were insisting I finance my own mistreatment. The letter used polite, clinical language, but the message was clear. Keep paying or face consequences. It was a small, loud attempt to scare me into submission. I called Erin and we talked through the options. She was blunt. "They're trying to bully you," she said. "They want to make this too expensive to fight." She suggested ways to respond, to push back, but pushback meant more money out of my account. Between the apartment rent, the legal fees, the counseling bills, and the everyday costs of being a single mother, my savings were getting thin. I started canceling little comforts I'd allowed myself before. No more takeout, stretching the grocery list to the bone. I watched my bank balance like it was a live animal that needed feeding. At night, I lay awake listening to Mila's breathing in the next room and doing math in my head. The numbers were cold and terrifying, but I kept thinking of her face on the kitchen floor. I'd signed up for this kind of fight the minute I took her hand and carried her out. Still, the weight of it pressed down. I felt the tightness in my jaw and the ache in my chest. Money had become a weapon in their hands, and I had to be smarter than their weapon. Erin told me not to give in. "They can try to make this expensive," she said, "but the court will see the pattern if we build the case carefully." That's what I held on to when the days felt like they were chewing through me. I started tracking every dollar I spent on the case in a little notebook. It was a small ritual, turning the murky fear into a list of facts I could control. It kept me moving. When Erin said the judge had ordered them to hand over their bank papers, I felt oddly light, like someone had cracked a window in a hot room. It meant the game was changing. For too long, their words had been the only ones that counted. Now, the numbers would have to speak. A heavy manila envelope arrived at Erin's office a few days later. She called me in and laid the documents out on her conference table. It wasn't glamorous. It was just statements and receipts, the quiet detritus of other people's lives. I sat across from her and peered down at lines of figures, transfers, and merchant names that meant nothing on their own but told a story once you followed the trail. Erin pointed to a recurring deposit. "Here's where your mortgage payment lands each month," she said. Seeing the dollar amount printed in black on white made it painfully real. Then she moved through the list of where the money went. It was all there, payments labeled to the tax agency, a big charge to a national department store, recurring subscriptions, and odd little transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. She gave me one of those looks she uses on clients when the picture is worse than they expect. "They've been using your payment to cover other things," she said without sugarcoating it. "Back taxes, credit card debt, a shopping spree. They were living off of you while pretending to be struggling." Putting names to numbers shifted the story from suspicion to proof. Aaron circled a line with a highlighter, the payment to the state for past taxes. The amount was more than my car was worth. There was another big chunk for a department store card. "That's new furniture and electronics," Aaron said. "There are charges for a big screen television and a home theater system in December." They weren't cutting corners, they were covering old debts and buying comforts. As the printer's hum filled the room and Aaron sifted through the papers, it became clearer and uglier. Their invitation for us to move in had been a financial bait-and switch. They'd asked me to sign up to become their cushion. My mortgage payment had kept them afloat while they spent money on things they didn't need. It wasn't just negligence toward Mila, it was exploitation. Aaron picked up another stack and laid it in front of me. "Here," she said, pointing to a grouped set of charges. One line caught at my throat. There was a payment to the tax agency for $14,600, another to a department store for $9,300, small charges to restaurants but also to a legal advice site. The last one made my blood run cold when Aaron explained what she'd found. She'd followed the breadcrumbs from a few curious website charges and had someone check the search history tied to their email. There it was on a plain page. A search asking if you could force a spouse to borrow from their retirement account to cover family debts. The date was just a few weeks before I left. The idea that they were planning to push me to raid my retirement hit me like ice. I'd been saving for years for a future that had been a neutron star to burn for their convenience. They weren't just trying to keep me under their thumb, they were planning to hollow out my future. It felt personal in a way that made my hands go numb. Erin leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "We're not asking for primary custody anymore," she said. "We're asking for sole custody. We're submitting this. We want supervised visitation for Derek, and we want the judge to see that their financial behavior is part of the abuse. We go for the kill." Her words were blunt, but they matched the ugly clarity of the papers. I felt a strange calm rise up. The case had gone from a moral fight to a factual one, and facts were things you could line up and point at. I thumbed through the pages again, letting the printed numbers and the online searches map out their plan. It was a map I could read now, and Aaron had a knife sharp enough to cut the root off. I left Aaron's office with photocopies of statements in my bag and a strange, nervous energy in my chest. The discovery process had done what it was supposed to do. It had pulled back the curtain and let the light in. I was still tired, still skint, still carrying the loneliness like an old coat, but for the first time in months I felt the weight shift a little. They had been hiding behind the house and the family image. Now their paper trail was making them naked. The worst discovery was the one that made the whole thing cold and deliberate. Aaron had asked for anything that looked odd in their statements, anything that smelled like planning. She'd subpoenaed a legal advice website because there were small charges to it on one of their cards. I remember sitting in her office while she scrolled through the printout, the room humming with the copier and the faint scent of coffee. Papers felt heavy in my hands, heavier than the tablet had felt. She stopped and pointed. "There," she said. "Look at this." It was a simple line on a plain page, a search from Jean's account dated just a month before I left. The words were ugly in their plainness. "Can I force my son's wife to borrow from her retirement account to cover family debts?" The sentence sat on the paper like a little confession, neat and horrifying. They weren't scrambling. They weren't asking whether it was right. They were asking how to make me pay for their mess. My chest clenched so hard it sounded like a small animal trapped in me. Aaron folded the paper carefully and put it in front of me. "That's their plan," she said. "They wanted you to tap into your retirement to keep their house running." They were counting on you to fund the life they'd already spent. I thought of the years of setting aside small amounts for a future that used to look ordinary, college for Mila, maybe a car for her when she was a teenager, a safety net. It felt personal in a way that hit deeper than the kitchen floor or the texts or the way they smiled at one another over my head. This was about stealing a future. Erin's voice was steady, but there was a hard edge to it now. This changes things, she said. We can't just ask for reasonable custody now, we go full. We ask the court for sole custody and supervised visits for Derek. We show them this, we show them the pattern. Emotional abuse to the child and then financial abuse to you. They plan to drain you. I let the paper sit on my lap and told myself to breathe. The fight I'd been in up to that point felt like a skirmish. This was a clear plan to ruin me. Knowing their aim turned the anger into something sharp and focused. It wasn't just about protecting Mila anymore. It was about making sure no one else got tricked into paying with their life savings so someone else could buy another big screen television. We filed the documents. Erin crafted our motion the way I used to write an incident report, cold, clear, without flourish. The courthouse suddenly felt like a place where facts could cut through pity and performatives. I clung to that hope because I had very little else at the time. The preliminary hearing was the first place the whole mess would be aired in public. I remember walking into the courtroom and feeling like I'd entered the belly of some old animal, wood panels, cold leather chairs, the echo of shoes. Judge Robert Hayes sat behind a raised desk, an older man with a face like a ledger, lined, careful, used to making decisions about other people's storms. Derek's lawyer was all polished calm, slick hair, a practiced smile. He spoke for them with the smoothness of someone who's done this 1,000 times. He painted a picture for the judge. He talked about family instability and how I had ripped a child out of her home. He used words like hysterical and vindictive with the kind of certainty that makes them feel true if you don't look too closely. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled, and listened. I felt the air in my chest thin. Erin laid out the evidence. She spoke of the texts, the witness statements, the photos, the bank records, the legal searches. She tried to draw a straight line from the money I'd paid to the choices they made and from those choices to how Mila was treated. But when she handed the financial records across and asked the judge to consider them as proof of motive, he cut her off. This is a private family matter, Judge Hayes said, his voice carrying that slow, judicial weight. Families have conflicts. People say things in anger. The court should be cautious about drawing broad conclusions from marital finances. He sounded like someone closing a book he didn't want to finish. He wasn't dismissive in a rude way. He was doing what a lot of judges do when they see messy lives and want to reduce the courtroom to what they know best. I felt the words as a kind of betrayal. Here were boxes of facts and dollar signs, and the man in the robe treated them like gossip. He ordered a continuance, pushed the main hearing back by weeks, and assigned a court-appointed evaluator to speak with Mila. The evaluator's appointment was a small mercy in the logic of courts, but the delay felt like a victory for them and a slow terror for me. The judge's decision made it sound like my life, my daughter's life, was a private quarrel, not a case with consequences and a paper trail. I walked out of the courthouse into a steady rain. The sky was the color of dishwater and the drops hit my face like little questions. Derek and his parents walked past me on the sidewalk, Marla with that tight, pleased expression that had become her mask. It was like watching people who hadn't been touched by the truth strut after they'd convinced someone it didn't exist. For hours afterward, I couldn't stop hearing the phrase private family matter. It kept looping like a tape. Did it mean that everything could be swept under a rug because someone had the right tone and the right handshake? Had I made a mistake by telling the truth? Those doubts crawled into the safest parts of me and set up camp. I drove back to the apartment in a cold fog. The building's hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent and wet rain. The apartment felt smaller than it had that morning. Mila was at a friend's house and the quiet pressed in on me. I sat at the kitchen table staring at our file folder, the documents splayed out like a map someone had left on a picnic blanket. Aaron had told me to expect delays, to expect judges to be cautious. But knowing something and feeling it are two different things. For the first time in weeks, the old fear I'd carried since childhood, being dismissed, being the one no one believes, started to climb out from where I'd buried it. At the same time, there was a tiny, stubborn voice that reminded me of the third-party people I had collected. Miss Julia Turner, the teacher who had written worried notes. Dana Brooks, the counselor who had seen Mila draw my safe house in crayon. Tracy Miller, the neighbor who had watched them leave for the amusement park. And Tara Wallace from Child Protective Services, who had opened a file and was, painfully, still listening. Their words weren't dramatic. They were quiet, professional observations, and that's what kept me upright. If a judge wouldn't weigh the dollars, maybe he'd listen to people who didn't stand to gain from our fight. For days, I lived in the stretch between dread and preparation. I filled up notebooks with timelines, with the dates and times of texts, with photocopies of statements. It felt like stacking firewood in winter. The work kept the panic at bay. It made the truth concrete again. When the main hearing day finally arrived, I felt like someone about to walk onto a stage without a script except the truth itself. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. My hands were steady, but I felt the nervous tremor in my shoulders. Aaron had called our witnesses and told them the importance of clear, calm speech. Their names were on the docket in a neat list, like soldiers waiting to be called. Julia Turner was the first to speak for us. She came across the courtroom like someone used to classrooms, not courtrooms, simple shoes, a cardigan, her hair in a tidy knot. She looked tired but honest. Under Aaron's questions, she described Mila as she had been last fall, bright, talkative, always drawing, eager for reading time. Then she said how that changed after the move. She stopped raising her hand, Miss Turner said. She stopped drawing much. She'd come to school with dark circles under her eyes, and she seemed like she was trying to be smaller. Hearing a teacher speak that plainly was small and enormous at once. I felt a rush of gratitude and something else, relief that someone outside our home had seen what had been happening. Next, Aaron called Dana Brooks, the counselor. Dana had gentle eyes and a soft, sure way of speaking. She talked about trauma in language that didn't sound like judgment. She explained that children respond to feeling unsafe by withdrawing, by trying to be invisible. She read a short note from Mila, the little crayon drawing of our apartment with the words, "My safe house." The courtroom was quiet enough that you could hear the sound of a pen scratching on paper in the next row. Then Tracy Miller took the stand. She was a neighbor with a sprightly energy and a steady voice. She remembered small details like shoes and the sound of the Lawson minivan. She said simply, "I saw them leave with Harper. I did not see Mila." Her words were small but precise, like a stitch placed exactly where it needed to be. Each witness wasn't dramatic. They were ordinary people saying ordinary things that together made an extraordinary truth. As they spoke, I felt the room change. It wasn't sudden, it was a slow, steady brightening, like a curtain being pulled back. The judge listened. For the first time since the preliminary hearing, I felt like someone in that room was hearing the whole thing instead of smoothing it into a private quarrel. Aaron called Derek to the stand. He walked up like he owned the room, but his confidence was a thin suit that didn't quite fit. He answered questions with short, defensive phrases, the kind people use when they're counting on the world to believe them without looking too closely. Aaron had the tablet messages ready. She asked him directly in a voice that didn't let him wiggle away, "Did you write this to your mother?" The words flashed on the screen, "Be hard on Mila." He blanched. "It's taken out of context," he said, as if context could make the sentence kind. "In what context?" Aaron asked. "Does a father tell a grandparent to be hard on his 9-year-old so his other child doesn't feel second best?" She let that sit in the air like a dropped plate. He looked down at his hands and couldn't answer. Then she walked the courtroom through the money. She showed the payments and where they went. The judge's face tightened when he saw the tax payment, the department store charges, and the little searches about taking money from retirement. It wasn't elegant evidence. It was a stack of bills and bank lines that, when read together, painted a picture. Aaron explained it slowly. You used her money to cover your debts and to buy comforts while telling a child there wasn't enough for cake. You planned to pressure her to tap her retirement. She spoke plainly and the facts were sharp and ugly. Derek's lawyer tried to redirect, saying this was about feelings and family, not spreadsheets. Aaron turned, looked at him, and said something I'll never forget. A family that treats a child like a guest and treats money as a weapon is making choices. Those choices hurt real people. The courtroom hummed. Marla's face was a hard mask. Jean's eyes looked hollow. Their polished defense had been stripped away by a cold, clear trail of paper. The unraveling wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow collapse, a dozen small truths stacking until they outweighed the performance they'd practiced. Derek's excuses sounded thinner and thinner until finally he had nothing left that was true to tell. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't plan to make a speech. I told the facts, one after another, like I was filing a report at work. I said the date I came home early. I said what I smelled and what I saw: bleach, a bucket, a small hand scrubbing a tile until her knees were raw. I read the text about the real granddaughter, and I put the tablet messages and the financial pages into a clear timeline. I kept my voice steady. Anger would have made my words messy. I wanted them to be clean and true. The judge sat back and rubbed his chin. He had that look of someone who'd seen plenty of family messes, but this time his face changed. It wasn't grandstanding or a dramatic flourish. It was quiet and official. He told the courtroom he had read the documents and listened to the witnesses. He said he was disturbed by what he had seen. Then he made the decisions that lifted a weight off my chest in a way I couldn't have imagined. He gave me sole legal and physical custody of Mila. That meant I was the one who would make the big decisions for her, and she would live with me. Derek's contact was limited to supervised visits twice a month and only after he completed a parenting course. The judge also issued an order forbidding Marla and Jean from contacting us or coming within 500 feet of our home or Mila's school. It was clear and simple. They weren't allowed near her. When the gavel came down, a quiet settled in that felt like good work done. It didn't erase the months of fear or the nights I'd spent counting bills, but it made room to breathe. I felt the relief in a slow, warming way, like the first long breath after holding your breath underwater. 6 months later, our life had a different shape. The foreclosure on the Lawson house went through. It sold at a county auction for far less than it was worth. Marla and Jean moved into a small rental in another state, their proud house reduced to an expensive mistake. Derek finished his parenting course because the court said he had to, but when he came to visit, it was awkward and quiet. He was more a stranger than a dad. Mila felt the distance with the clarity of a child. She asked good, simple questions about why people change, and I answered in ways she could understand. Our apartment was small, but it let light in. We filled it with things we actually needed. A couch that didn't squeak, a table we could eat on, a bookshelf where Mila stacked the chapter books she loved. We adopted a gray shelter cat who seemed to know the exact moment to curl up against her knee. We named him Pepper. He sleeps at the foot of her bed now, a soft, steady presence. On our little balcony, we planted beans in an old, dented pot. Watching Mila water the tiny green sprout every morning became a small ritual of repair. It was a slow, stubborn kind of work, but it was ours. I could feel the cost of the fight in the thinning of our savings and in the lines around my eyes, but I could also feel something else: safety. It wasn't flashy. It was the steady light that fills a house when you're allowed to keep a child from having to scrub floors to earn a cookie. The drawings came back first. They appeared in a messy cascade on the refrigerator, taped up with whatever tape I could find. She used bright, stubborn colors, red so bright they made my chest ache, greens that tasted like spring. Her pictures had suns with smiling faces and houses with big windows and trees with too many apples. The one I loved most was the little drawing she did the week after the hearing. 2 stick figures in a window and a little gray shape at their feet. Above, in careful 9-year-old handwriting, she wrote 2 words: "Loved here." I took that drawing down and framed it. It hangs by our front door where we see it every time we come in. When I feel tired or when the days are thin with worry, I stand there and look at it. My revenge wasn't a public spectacle. It wasn't a shouting match or a scandal meant to humiliate. It was quieter and angrier and cleaner than that. It was the canceling of a payment, the call to a caseworker, the careful collection of evidence, and the patience to put truth in front of people who could make decisions. It was the slow work of rebuilding a life where my daughter is not a guest but the foundation. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight to protect someone you love, please share your experience in the comments below. Your voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.